John. Pollock is a broadcaster and journalist, formerly of the Fight Network and The Law on TSN Radio. He is currently the co-owner of Post Wrestling, a crowdsourced podcast and media network. We talk about his career in broadcasting, along with his path from unpaid intern to online entrepreneur. I really enjoyed talking to John, and I think you will enjoy listening to his story. So, without further ado, on with the show. All right. I am joined today by John Pollock, who is a broadcaster and journalist, formerly of the Fight Network and The Law on TSN Radio. He is currently the co-owner of Post Wrestling, a crowdsourced podcast and media network that covers the world of professional wrestling, mixed martial arts with a sprinkle of pop culture. John, how are you doing today?
Phil, I'm doing so much better after that introduction. You've really lifted up my spirits just hearing such accolades. Thank you. It's great to finally be on the Fishball podcast with you. It's a show I've wanted to be on for a long time. I had to wait in line, and finally my number was up today, so thank you.
Sure, that's one way to look at it. But we're happy to have you on. We've wanted to have you on for a long time. So there's going to be a certain amount of guests who are joining us who are familiar with you because they're coming over from another podcast. Many listeners might not know that I do another show once a month that John hosts on Post Wrestling, where we review each month's UFC pay-per-view event. And so thankfully, John has finally returned the favor, and I can have him here, and I can be the host and ask him the tough question.
All this, the tables are turned here, so I'm looking forward to it, Phil, and it's great to be on the show. Avid listener myself.
Thanks, John. So mostly the focus of the show will be about your career in broadcast and media and business. But I did want to talk a little bit about wrestling, and this one question I had. And what is your first professional wrestling memory?
My first professional wrestling memory would have been as a young child, just like many, I think, that probably found it just flipping around on television. I was been 7 years old at the time, and the first memory I have is the Rockers breakup, where Shawn Michaels takes Marty Jannetty, throws him through the barbershop window, and I don't know what that said about me, but I was instantly captivated that here is how friends stop being friends when they're adults. They throw each other through barbershop windows, and I guess that just became, this is on Saturday afternoons here in Toronto, and I became just a follower at that point at the age of 7 going on 8.
I remember that moment very much as well. Yeah, I was shocked. Okay, so you were a fan, and did that persist over the years? Like, when did you decide that you wanted to be involved in that business?
I mean, I can't even remember when I really made the decision. I think it was at a time that, as I'm getting into high school, and I'm still following it pretty closely, but I'm also more so getting into MMA at that time because the pay-per-views were more readily available. This is around 2001 in Canada. So I'm following that a lot. But it was really, like, that we can get into was kind of learning about the Law radio program, Live Audio Wrestling, which, again, just by fluke, I was a listener of the Fan 590, and this wrestling show comes on, and it wasn't just the tongue-in-cheek kind of style that you would get of wrestling commentary and editorializing. It was like, here were guys that were talking about the industry from a pretty intelligent point of view. They would have wrestlers come on that spoke out of character, and I thought it was just a breath of fresh air. And I can't necessarily say that had that show not come along that I would have just faded off from pro wrestling at that point as I'm in high school. And it was kind of that show and kind of going into that side of things, looking at it from kind of a more analytical point of view, that I ended up getting to know the guys with the Law, and that just one thing led to the other. And then eventually, right as I was starting university, I started working as a call screener there, and that just led to other things with the Fight Network. But I never made the conscious decision to work in this industry because I always wanted to be a reporter of some sort, work in the field of journalism. But wrestling, like that to me, was not even an option. I mean, that wasn't really like what would that even mean, being a pro wrestling journalist? I wasn't even thinking of that in high school. So it was more just a series of circumstances and some luck along the way that led me to this position.
Okay, and I do want to talk about the law a little bit, but you were talking about high school, and I did want to mention something and get your thoughts on it. So, bit unusual. When you were in high school, you had a job at a movie theater at that time, and it's. I think it's fair to say that was a pivotal point in your life. So maybe you want to talk about that.
That's some extraordinary research. That's why I'm here on the show with a professional in Phil Chair Talk. It is true. I did work at a movie theater in high school, and it was a complete fluke. Again, that I was out with a friend of mine, and we were in the area, and there was like a job fair going on at this movie theater, and both of us were like, "You want to go in and do a job interview?" We were like, it was completely on a whim. And both of us got hired. It was like, clearly it was just like a cattle call for anybody. But yeah, I started working at this movie theater in 2001 and ended up meeting like a ton of friends that I'm still friends with to this day, including this individual that worked at the pretzel place, as I recall, and I would do podcasts with as well.
Oh, you're referring to me at this point. Yeah. Well, I did work at I worked at many of the stations there during my time. I was a bit of a renaissance man at the movie theater.
I was the low man on the totem pole. I was the guy that would have to stand and rip your tickets. It was called working door, and it was the absolute dirt worst job. You'd stand for the entire shift.
Oh, please. It is not worse than cleaning grease out of, buckets. No.
I disagree, because I did that too, and I would have taken that. I did take that job over standing at door. Will just drive you into hours of boredom that you're just hoping that your shift ends or you just keel over and pass out. That was the life of standing there on a Sunday afternoon when no one is coming to watch movies.
You raise a good point. But we'll move on from which is the dirtiest job at the movie theater. And just to sort of end on that, I mean, there was also many of your friends you mentioned who have persisted since then. You were also watching this pro wrestling, these events there together, and so maybe you want to talk about the camaraderie that brought, and if that had anything to do with your continued interest in this industry.
It definitely did. Until I worked at that job, like following wrestling, like I had a buddy in elementary school and that I went to high school with that followed it. And he was literally my only friend that I knew of that followed wrestling. Like I just assumed it's like this very niche thing that it was. And then when I started working at this movie theater, I think part of the reason I really gravitated towards this job was this large group of people that you were a part of as well. That, I mean, a huge amount of them like followed wrestling, and it just blew my mind that here there's like a group setting that followed wrestling, and I think that definitely helped at that time in terms, like I wasn't working in the industry in any conceivable form. It was just I was working a high school job at a movie theater, but finding these friends that just having that common interest was definitely something that I think enhanced my interest in following the product at that time.
Okay, and you've already mentioned the law, and I want to talk about your time there, but maybe you can indulge us with a bit of history. What is the law?
So the law is a radio program that started off as just an internet radio show right at the infancy where internet streaming was just beginning. And then the team that worked there, it involved Donnie Abreu, Jeff Merrick, Chris Tidwell, and then from there it got a slot on the Fan 590. This would have been in early 1999. So it became a very popular radio show. It would bounce around stations. It went to Talk 640, which became Mojo Radio, and then from there to CFRB, Sirius. It bounced all over the place, but it became like, especially in Canada, one of the go-to sources for pro wrestling, and to a lesser extent, like mixed martial arts news and interviews. And yeah, kind of my entryway point was just listening to them on the radio, and then ending up getting to know a lot of the guys that were associated with it, with Dan Labransky, Jason Agnew, and became friends with them, and then started working there in 2003.
Okay, so maybe then you want to talk about what you were doing at the start there, and I guess that's also overlapping with your post-secondary career and or post-secondary school. So maybe you want to talk about that. And you mentioned you always wanted to be a journalist.
Yeah, so this was right at the end of the summer of 2003. So I'm going into my first year at Ryerson for radio and television, the same program that you were in, Phil, that Great I was program. following in your footsteps. So I get a call or an email like right at the end of the summer of, hey, we need a call screener. This is for live audio wrestling. Are you interested? And the prospect of giving up my Sunday nights to go answer phones with no pay, I thought, this is a great idea. I am all in. And I that is where I began call screening. So, but it was a very, like, number one, I wanted to do the job. I wanted to work on this show. Being paid was not even secondary to me at that point. I mean, I would have, and I did do it for free. And it also gave me like an inroads at the radio station they were on, which was AM 640. So that's kind of how I started working there, just strictly as a call screener. So I would go in Sunday nights on pay-per-view nights. It would be earlier than that. And I just got to shadow Dan Labransky and Jason Agnew and serve as the call screener. And I think at that point as well, I was starting to do a few things for the website, just writing up some news updates and doing that portion of things, because it's right at this point that Jeff Merrick is kind of transitioning away from live audio wrestling. He had been the focal host of The Law for years at this point, and he was getting more involved with hockey, which at 640 at the time, they had the radio rights to the Toronto Maple Leafs games, and Jeff Merrick, that was really his entree into hockey, and that's where I think more people would know him today from, is hockey more so than wrestling. So I was just kind of interested in doing anything that they wanted to throw at me, and I was balancing school with this call screening / law kind of internship, if you want to call it that, and still working at the movie theater at this time as well. Like I didn't quit that job until I had something else paying, which wouldn't come until about a year later.
Okay. And so then maybe talk about, maybe you'd like to talk about then some of the key experiences then at the Law, and then transitioning from leaving school into sort of, I guess, it wouldn't be your first media job because you already kind of had it, but sort of, I guess, moving into the Fight Network and your other coverage.
Yeah. So, with the Law, I was very lucky in the sense that we're working with Dan and Jason. Like, they were very open to throwing stuff at me. Like when one of them couldn't do an interview, like they weren't hesitant to let me go out and do it. And it seems like a completely normal thing, but it's something I would encounter too. Like once you're at a certain place, whether it be radio or TV, I see some people that get very insecure about giving off responsibilities to other people. So I was always very thankful that they kind of didn't have that kind of insecurity or mindset at all. They were more than happy to let me do a lot of things. Come 2004, so at this point, I'm in my second year of university, and that's when I start. That's when I get a job working regularly with 640, with the radio station that the Law is on. So I'm doing board opping, fill-in producing on some shows as well. So at that point, they're giving me a paid job that allows me my exit to quit the movie theater job. Now I'm working in radio, and then the biggest transition came in early 2005, because that's when myself, Dan, Jason, we got called to a meeting, and we're assuming that the Law is done, that the ownership of the Law, which is still, like, Jeff Merrick had like an ownership stake. It's a whole ownership picture that I'm not going to be able to paint. But they informed us they were selling the Law to this new upstart digital channel called the Fight Network. And we had never heard of the Fight Network. We had never heard of the people, but they took us out for lunch to the people behind the Fight Network to kind of explain what the whole idea was behind the channel, where the law fit in. And in essence, they had this idea for a 24/7 combat sports channel, including professional wrestling, and they had not launched yet. So the law was going to be, at least if we own this radio station, here's an outlet where we can run commercial spots, where we can promote that the Fight Network is coming, and it's a really respected brand within the pro wrestling space. So this channel kind of just gets going, and I ended up getting hired there pretty much like at a full-time position. Mind you, I'm still in university at this time. I'm finishing up my second year of university. And then that whole summer, I worked full time at the Fight Network. They would launch in September of 2005. And that was when they presented me, and they wanted me to drop out of school at that point just to dedicate all my time to the Fight Network. And that was not something I was willing to do. Did not seem like a smart idea. So I deferred. And that was pretty much where I was still doing all my 640 work, this Fight Network job, and university. So I would say like my third year of university was the most chaotic when it came to balancing all of these things in the air, because I had that issue where I didn't want to give up one thing with the fear that the other thing might fall out. So I wanted to keep all these balls in the air, because if this Fight Network thing doesn't get off the ground, I've got this radio position and I can do more stuff at the radio station. And if I quit the Fight Network, like maybe this thing's going to take off, and I miss being on the ground floor there. And then there's this school thing as well that I felt I should see to the end of, as well, as I was 2 years deep in tuition.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you were priming yourself for this juggling act that you've become accustomed to. Now, before we get off of that time in university, I think it's important to mention that, you met somebody important there. As far as I believe so. Is that where you met your current partner, Wei Ting?
Yes. So Wei and I were in the same year of radio and television, and throughout the first year, I never interacted with this person. I never knew this person. And it wasn't like we had a giant class either. It was like 180 people, I want to say, were in our year. And it was in second year that we had, I think it was like a television course of some sort. And we were just in one of those assembly halls. And I overhear this conversation behind me talking about live audio wrestling from the night before. And I definitely am not the kind of person to just be, hey, live audio wrestling. But I just mentioned over, I'm like, oh, do you listen to the law? And he's like, yeah. And I felt like such an asshole saying this, but my response was, well, I'm John Pollock. And this was Wei, and he's like, holy shit, you're John Pollock. I'm like, yeah. And that was how we met in second year. And fast forward a few months later, and the Fight Network was looking for new interns. So they had me send out a big mailer to all the RTA students of, hey, there's an internship available here. They were looking to hire like 3 people on an intern for internships. And one of them was Wei, who applied. And I went to them and said, this person follows the show. He'd be a great person to bring in. And they did. And that was kind of how Wei Ting got into the Fight Network, and where our friendship began in 2005.
Awesome. So you mentioned the Fight Network and how it was a startup. So maybe you want to talk about a little bit about what that process was, being involved in media organization from the ground up, and some of the things that you encountered there, and your general memories of that time and that experience.
There's probably a book there at some point, like being there at 2005, I'm 21 at this time, and kind of in this world working at this television station. And it was, I think, definitely with the benefit of hindsight, I can more appreciate that time, because in the moment, I'm just like, here, I'm starting. This is my first serious job in media. And it was a company that I think was definitely well-intentioned. It felt like from the get-go, like this was a this was a digital channel in Canada, and it operated as though it was already ESPN. Like, there were enormous expenses. There were these lavish parties that were thrown at the government, just things that are just, you don't question at the time, or at least you do, but you don't, like, you just assume, like, okay, there's clearly a strategy in place here. The first iteration of the Fight Network, it was just a bit of like what could have been, because there was all this capital that just seemed to go out the window and not necessarily like have a concerted budget and how can we best grow this network. A lot of it, to me, like looking back, it was a lot of flash. It was a lot of, hey, look at us, which there's an element to that of finding your place in the media landscape to get that attention on yourself. But personally, one of the biggest obstacles I had to go through was that, I didn't want to be this like, at the bottom of the totem pole my whole time there. And I learned during my years there that when you come in as like at the bottom, which I was as a third year student, that's how I was viewed by a lot of the management was, John's talented, but we view him in the eyes of like an intern, essentially, that if I wanted to graduate to do more producing work, more on-air work, it was almost like I almost had to leave to get that stigma away from me. And I think that's what a lot of interns sometimes have to deal with. I got lucky in the sense that there was a lot of turnover at the Fight Network, and one entire entity of management was replaced by another, and then another, that I kind of was able to eliminate that stigma without leaving. And it was not always, it was definitely not a smooth ride to get to where I was, but by a certain point, it was, I was able to do more on-air work there, but it was also at a time when the company was going through a lot of turmoil. Like, there were times like we had to find a new office, that we were very much looking to be on the verge of going out of business. So to be there and experience it firsthand, it was interesting to learn the things you should do running a business, but also a lot of lessons in what you shouldn't do as well. So I took a lot from that.
Okay, and also during that time, you had the opportunity to do some pretty cool things in the just covering the world of professional wrestling and MMA as well. We haven't really talked that much about MMA, so maybe do you have any memories, some significant events that you really enjoyed covering, or some key moments in your career that you look back on?
Well, I would say at the top of that time period, going back to 2007, that's when the Fight Network, they had just hired Mauro Ranallo the previous fall. At this time, he's still calling all of the Pride events, which is a Japanese mixed martial arts company, or was. And he was living in Abbotsford, British Columbia, uprooted and moved here to Toronto. And this was, again, another kind of case study in some of like the Fight Network's planning. Was they invested in Mauro Ranallo, hired him, moved him across the country, and they had no job for him. Like, we did not even have a studio. Like, we were just operating on tapes, and we were doing minimal original programming other than like sending people out on location. So Mauro, like, he would joke, like, I'm the world's highest paid internet surfer, because he would come in and he'd be on the computer all day, and he had nothing to do, and he was just craving any kind of work. So it was just something that fell into our lap, that Sirius had launched a station just down the street called Hardcore Sports Radio. And this was attached with the Score at the time, and they were looking for new programming. And we went through these meetings, and they greenlit a show to be called Fight Network Radio that Mauro would host, and I was tabbed as the producer. So I was very much excited to do this, and it would be a daily 1-hour combat sports radio show. And that, to me, was probably my most fun time doing Fight Network related work, until I would like get into all the podcast stuff with Way, because it was something, having a product to show for all of our work each day. Like, we would do all this work, go through news, book guests. It was a lot of guest wrangling at this time, because I was still doing the law. I'm booking all the guests for that on Sunday, and then doing this daily show, which would be 2 to 3 guests per day. And it was something like I thought we did a lot of great work, and we kind of just missed the podcast boom, because I thought this show would have been a great entity in podcast form that we were doing on Sirius. You could download the show, but it was a lot of fun doing that show. And that went I worked on that show from 2007 to 2009. And then Morrow would end up working exclusively at The Score in Canada. He left the Fight Network, and I stayed at the Fight Network, and then went through 2 years that honestly were like pretty shitty. This would have been like 2009, 2010. There just wasn't a whole lot going on at the Fight Network. I was not really doing a whole lot, and was just trying to keep myself busy. And that's sort of how we just backdoored our way into, I just needed something to do. And we got into me and Wei doing more podcasts, the two of us, because that was like the only thing keeping me busy.
Okay, well, that's a perfect segue into the next.
I'm here for the segues, Phil. I'm just trying to help.
Which is about Wei, starting that podcast. So maybe you want to talk about what that first show was, the idea, and how that grew into really your current business.
So as I said, like, we were doing the law, and Wei at this point had also come on board as a call screener. So we had Dan and Jay hosting. I was the producer, and Wei was a call screener. I was also the board op at this time as well. So anyway, my idea was, we're airing a show live on Sunday nights, and we would see our numbers. Like, there were a lot of people that were tuning in and listening to this on Sunday nights, especially following a big pay-per-view. We're on the air immediately after, so that was a great time slot for us. But my thought was, like, thinking strictly for the website, who's coming to download this show the next day if they've already listened to it? So I thought, what if me and Wei just did 30 minutes just riffing off stuff, and we tacked that on to the law? So there's an incentive to download the show even if you listen to it live on Sunday nights. So that was the impetus behind it. Just to squeeze numbers out, Phil. That was it. So we started with a concept called Ask Away, where it would be a half hour of Wei and I just talking about our week. And sometimes it didn't even have anything to do with wrestling. We did that for a little bit. And then I think we shelved it for some time and then revisited it, because I really wanted Wei to do this with me, and he had no interest in doing on-air stuff, even like in podcast form. So his caveat was that I will do this with you, but it has to be centered around wrestling in some way. So I said, how about we take an old show and we're just going to chat about that event afterwards? He said, fine, that works. So that became Review Away. And that started in 2009 and September of 2009, actually. And from there, as more and more of my work lessened at the Fight Network, I was just getting very disillusioned at this point. Like, I was doing the law stuff, but that was one night a week. And I did the reviews with Wei, but again, that was one afternoon that we would record. And then Monday to Friday, I just saw like my work it was less and less and less. I was not being put on TV at this point. They had hired a new host, and it was pretty much told to me that, we're hiring this new host. You're still going to have plenty of time on television. We're going to have lots of stuff for you. They had nothing for me. I would pitch ideas. They would be turned down. So at that point, I was like, I either need to get out of here, or I just need to do something that's going to be stimulating, because I am just not enjoying going to work every day. And it was, and a lot of this was just, I would just bounce off Wei, like, just my frustrations. And he said, what if we did some more podcasts? And he just suggested that. And Wei was busy. Wei was, like, at this point, one of their top editors. So it's not like he had all of this free time, but was willing to volunteer his time, because I think he could see how miserable I was becoming. And we started doing shows Tuesday morning following Raw. We added a review show after Impact. So we were doing like 3 shows a week at this point. And this was where I was getting a lot of fulfillment from. And I was watching this thing grow. Like, we were seeing the numbers for it. We were seeing the feedback we were getting online. And like, here I'm watching, like, the Fight Network, they were always trying to get into the US. That was like the big thing. We have to get into the US. And they're just trying to get any kind of traction. And I was watching this in real time, that me and Wei are doing a podcast literally out of a converted broom closet, and we're getting a good reception to this podcast idea. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to trust my instincts here, and more so than what I'm being told. And that gave me a lot of confidence about just my own ideas and believing that I know our product very well. And I had this incredible chemistry with this guy, with Wei, that I knew just worked, and we found an audience for it. So that at that point, I made the shift in my head. Like, I'm working here. Television is beyond secondary, and I really want to make the priority the stuff I do with Wei and the law.
Okay. So you create the show, you gain an audience. So maybe you want to talk about the growth of that, and that also sort of leads into a bit of the downfall of the Fight Network as well.
Yeah. So, at this point, we're really expanding like the law to be much more like, it went from a show people would listen to once a week on Sunday nights. And my goal was, let's try and create a network out of this and introduce, like, we were introducing other personalities as well. So it was kind of like the setup that I really enjoyed that like Bob McCowan had when he was on when he was doing primetime sports on the Fan 590, that he had this circle of people he could call upon, and it was like you can mix and match any of these personalities, and they were really, the audience was familiar with them, and that became the draw. And I started to see that in our numbers as well, that I'm one of the toughest parts was just scheduling all of these interviews. And I would see the numbers, and there would be shows that myself and Wei would do, and it would do better than like an interview with like a prominent name. And that to me was interesting, that people were more interested in just hearing me and Wei talk, or Dan and Jay talk, or Braden and others talking like that. That to me was something eye-opening, just in the sense of what we were building. So this was becoming something where we were putting out close to a show a day. I'm doing all the news on top of it. And this, as we're expanding all of this, a new producer comes in at the Fight Network by the name of Glenn McDonald, who pretty much just said, like, why is this guy just sitting in this room working all day when we're producing TV? Like, he seems to know his stuff. And it was, so anyway, long story short was that our regular host was going away for a week. They needed someone to fill in. I became that fill-in guy, and I never stopped being on air at that point. So I kind of had just, again, a more expanded schedule where, I mean, these things go up and down, but at this point, like, we're doing all these podcasts, and I'm also being utilized a lot more on the television side. So things were going well in that sense. It was extremely busy, but I would much rather be busy than what I had a year prior, where it was just finding things to do every day. You fast forward to, I guess, the downfall, and that would be, I think that the cracks really began at the Fight Network in 2016. At this point, they have heavily invested in and would eventually get ownership of the Impact Wrestling Group. And they were also launching like a lot of other things. There was a fantasy sports channel that they had put a ton of resources into. And then kind of the bottom fell out, I would say, in March of 2017. It's something that, there is no media company that I think has been spared from having like a bloodletting of cuts, but for the better, the Fight Network had gone through all these years, like, we had one big purge back in like 2008. And beyond that, I mean, it had been very rare that we had any kind of cuts. But then in early 2017, I remember I was home one day and I got a call from another colleague who had just been told had heard of cuts coming. And it was like this big series of cuts, did not impact me, but pretty much gutted the on-air portion. And that to me was really just the end of what the Fight Network was. We were like, myself and Wei were still there because they still saw a value in the law, but on-air stuff, it was pretty much done, and it just became such a different place. At that point, I really wanted to be gone. I was not happy there at this point. I was just doing the stuff with Wei. There's no more TV stuff. It just felt like everything was just telling me to try and move on. And I kind of had to figure out in my mind what is the smartest way to go about doing this. I'm a couple months away from myself and my wife having our first child. I also know if I quit, I've been there 12 years and I'd be giving up a package if I left. You're weighing all these different situations. And I thought that to just quit at that point would kind of be a selfish portion on my part, even though I was being encouraged, like, you should probably leave. So anyway, come the fall of 2017, that's when the next round of cuts come. This time, I am involved in the cuts and was just pretty much told, like, we're moving on. And as soon as I realized Wei was part of the cuts as well, it was a gift, because the two of us had become very unhappy at this point. We had kind of outlined like a plan of, okay, by this point, it's like, we need to break off and try our own thing. And like, we were ready at that point to be gone. And the day that, we both end up getting our notice, I mean, it was, if this was a game of blackjack, it was like that day, we drew the ace and the king and we were cashing out. So it was the end of the road for us. I didn't really have any hard feelings about leaving. And if anything, I was left with a lot of excitement, because now me and Wade didn't have any restriction to try this idea out on our own that we had talked about for quite some time. So there was a lot there, Phil. Am I being too wordy in all of these answers? Why don't we do the halftime show here and we assess how the interview is going in your estimation? How is this? I know I'm not Elliot Bayev level, but do give me your tips and pointers of how this is going.
Well, first of all, I think it's going tremendous, John. I would say you're definitely not being too wordy. We love to hear from you. That's why you're on the show. As you already mentioned, you're all about those big numbers. So, of course, that's why we had to have you on the show. And you just explaining as much as possible about your time is what I want to hear and what I think the people want to hear. So it sounds great so far. And you mentioned Elliot Bayev, a previous guest of mine, who you also know. And so I was going to ask you later, but maybe you want to talk about this as well. So you were covering MMA at the time at the Fight Network, and you decided that you were going to go train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So we haven't really talked about MMA coverage. So maybe if you'd like to elaborate on that. And I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually started training way back in 2007. I started going to Toronto BJJ, and I did it pretty religiously for about a year. I would just, these were like 6 a.m. classes that I would do before work. And I really loved it. I enjoyed it tremendously. And it just became a case of our studio moving, and that just it was such a close proximity for me to get to work after doing classes. And then when we moved studios, it became a bit tougher to get to. But then it was Wei that started going to open mat, and that's I ended up tagging along, and I did open mat. I did it in spurts. I did like jiu-jitsu for quite a while, and then right before Max was born, I was doing kickboxing pretty consistently, like 1 to 2 times a week prior to that. And then it was, and then I found out like you had been training at open mat, although you and I don't think we ever crossed paths at the gym.
No, I had been there like when the school had been like in its early stages. So before it had even moved to its own dedicated facility. And so I was there for about 2 years before I moved out of the city. So I stopped attending there. And then I think, somewhere right after that, I'd have to go back and look at the exact year, maybe like 2008 or so was when I finished there. But yeah, we never crossed paths, and I never crossed paths with Wei either, even when I went to visit.
Yeah, because Wei was doing it, man, there was like, I would say a 2-year period where he was going like 3-4 times a week. He was doing tournaments. I mean, he was deep into it at that point, more so than I was. But just on the MMA coverage side as well, if you want to talk about any of that, I mean, that just became, again, like in 2012, that's when I kind of got brought off the bench, so to speak, on the television side, because my day was, when we moved to this new office, there was a recording booth that I nabbed immediately. And I was in like this soundproof room in the corner. And I probably wasn't the most social person, which I kind of regret. But that would be my day. I would come to work. I'd go work in this studio. I'd do my interviews. I'd record stuff with Way. But I was just like, to someone new there, it's like, here's this guy just that hangs out in this corner studio. And I think Glenn McDonald, this producer, when he needed a fill-in, put me on. And then it was always funny. It was like, I was put on the air, but it was always with the idea that this is just a stopgap. We're just using you for this time period. And then this main host, she got a gig down in the US, so she left. So it was, we're going to do all these auditions, and while we're doing the auditions, you'll still be the fill-in. Like it was comical. And at some point, they were like, this guy is better than any of these people and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here. I really am not. I'm not by any means like the greatest on-air person. But like was told, like, you are better than the people we are bringing in for these auditions. Why are we not just using this guy? And believe me, there was also probably, it's way easier to just utilize me from an economical standpoint than hiring a whole new body. But anyway, that got me pretty much consistently on air, doing stuff at the Fight Network with Robin Black, with John Ramdeen, and we were recording stuff every day. And that included being like, I became the person that usually be me and Ramdeen that got sent to different events to do coverage the week of, going to big shows, whether they be the Canadian shows that we would go to, going to like UFC 200 I covered. So anyway, that was kind of the MMA side of things. And that became like, there was a stretch in there where I was literally working 7 days a week, because we would, at this time, the Fight Network also got the rights to, along with TSN, they were sharing in the UFC broadcast rights in Canada. So that meant working Monday to Friday, doing all the regular things I've gone over. And then we would be doing these Saturday nights that they just threw at us, where it would be coming in at like 6 o'clock, and we'd be, we'd follow all the fights. Then we'd go on the air for an hour and a half and get out of there at 2 a.m. And then while everyone else had the Sunday off, that was the day I had to do the law. And that became like, throughout the day, it's like you're putting clips together, you're doing a news pack for the website, you're doing all these other things. Then I'd go in to do the law Sunday night, which meant, arrive around 9, we go on at 11, we're on till 1 a.m. Then I'd get home, I had to edit the show and upload it. I'm going to sleep like 2:33, and then I'm up at 8 a.m. to get to the Fight Network stuff. And there just became a breaking point where I just could not keep up that schedule, when it was sort of like I was doing all the wrestling stuff, then I was doing a lot of the MMA stuff, but it was like the wrestling stuff's on an island, so that really wasn't always taken into account when it came to like what was on my plate. And I was very bad at kind of separating stuff and handing stuff off, which I should have.
All right. Now, you mentioned already with, as you were winding down at the Fight Network, that you and Way had sort of already, the germination of a plan had already emerged. So maybe you can talk about that, maybe what some of your initial ideas were before what would become post-wrestling.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, it was frustrating, because we saw what the law was able to do numbers wise. It was just something that never got monetized on the Fight Network side. Like, we had a sales department there at the Fight Network, and it was just something that, like, I looked at it, I'm like, can more not be done with this? And me and Way always had the confidence that this is something that could be self-sustainable if necessary, but we didn't have the proof. And I guess that was, a certain hesitancy that, okay, if we left the Fight Network and we launched this on our own, our options are a advertising based model, which, it comes with, some risk, because, ad sales could be great one month, terrible the next. You're very much at the whim of advertising, of advertisements, or you go a subscription model. And that part to me sounded more stable, but at the same time, for a decade, we've been doing shows for free. None of our listeners have ever had to pay to listen to any of our shows. Would they be so willing to do that? And that was going to be a bit of a gamble. But me and Way, like, we we would like get together every so often and we just hatch out these ideas. And it got us really excited that like, can we do this on our own? And what got really frustrating to me is that after the early cuts in 2017, it's like so many of my friends were gone. It was a really depressing stage of being here. Like it just felt like you were walking into an office where the life had been taken out of it after all these cuts. And, we had been told that, hey, this might not be the end of these cuts. Everyone, all your projects, like they have to be able to generate revenue. And I went to one of the executives and I said, listen, I know I can find advertising for the law, but if I'm going to go out there and be a salesperson, then I want to be able to be cut into that to some percentage, and was flat out told no. If I want to get ad sales, like I don't see any of that. So in some ways, it's like my job is dependent on this making money, but I am not being given any kind of ability to go out there or incentive to get any of these ad sales. And I was not motivated I'm not happy at this point. So losing this job was not a concern of mine at this time. So at that point, I'm just kind of fed up with everything. And we fast forward to the fall of 2017. That's when the cuts come down. And I was there early. This was on a Monday morning. And I guess I was probably one of, if not the first one, because it was essentially the law that was being cut this day. It wasn't as much widespread to the Fight Network by and large. But I get home and Wei, I guess, had the day off, and he had been called and said, hey, we need you to come down to the office. So Wei calls me and he's like, hey, what's going on? I've just been called down to the office. And I know what's about to happen because they had kind of let it slip to me in my news that Wei would be part of these cuts. So I just told him, listen, call me as soon as you're done. We'll meet up. And Wei got the news. He was totally cool with it. And we met up like 10 minutes later at a coffee shop nearby. And both of us, it was immediately on to like what we're going to do next. And let's do a show tonight and we'll be fine. That was kind of our thought, was that, this is off our shoulders and we're both more than ready to move on. But this became the period that was kind of this transition period. Like post wrestling was not a thing. It's not like we launched this the next day or anything. It took us a couple months to really conceive of this idea, build an infrastructure for it, and learn the first thing about running a business. And it just everything down to incorporating ourselves, hiring an accountant, doing all of these things. Wei taught himself how to build a website from scratch. It was designing logos, coming up with, we had to rename stuff. It was like all this different stuff that we had to go through. And part of that was, I think it was a good time as well for me to just take my foot off the gas pedal and to just take a break from everything as well. Like I took a week to kind of just decompose from like the last number of months and let us just come up with this idea for post wrestling, which we would launch just before the end of the year. We launched Christmas Eve of 2017.
Okay. And I'm about ready to get into that, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to touch on this. So that was effectively the end of the law as well. So not just, the end of your career at the Fight Network, but the end of the law. And that has a, pretty significant history. So maybe if you want to just touch on that idea for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, TSN Radio in Toronto was not going to continue with the show once the Fight Network was out. And that, was ultimately the end of the show. I had quietly left the show several months before, so I was not doing the Sunday show at this time. I had left in June because I was about to have our firstborn, and I knew I wanted to have the summer off. And, it kind of we had figured out like I would not be coming back to the show at that point unless it was for, the odd drop in or something like that for a show. So it was Dan and Jay doing the show at this point. And I think it was unfortunate that it came to an end for me. Like I just had I was just going through all of this Fight Network stuff at this time. So when the end came for me, like I didn't have any bad feelings about the end of any of this. Like I was just looking like I was done. I was ready to be finished at the Fight Network, and this was my open the door and be able to walk out. And the circumstances were pretty advantageous for me. It might have been a very different circumstance had it been me part of the cuts. And they, like, to be honest, I was surprised that they cut Way, because for me, they saw a value in the law, but realistically, I should have been cut back in March with the other on-air people. Like, I didn't think there was a huge value in retaining me beyond March once you had decided no more original programming was going to be done, or a very tiny amount of it. For Way, I mean, this guy was like their top editor, and he was, extremely valuable to them. So I always took that as like, that was like a gift that they included Way in these cuts, because they would have had work for Way to stay there. So as soon as they let it be known that like Way was part of this, like I didn't have any kind of concerns, because I knew it's like I've got Way to work with. But it was the end of the chapter for the law. Which, I mean, Dan and Jay have continued now with their own show as well. So, I mean, they've continued it in that sense. But realistically, like that was it. Like the Fight Network owns the rights to the law. So that was never something where they would have been able to continue under that name. And for me, I was looking for a clean break as well. So I thought for me personally, like, this is the end point of this chapter, and moving on to the next one. I didn't, I didn't have any, deep, like, ill feelings about the ending. I was just, that's how this goes. And then I would be a hypocrite to be the one that was upset during this period. I get let go and then be upset about that. Like, it wouldn't have been consistent with what I was going through at the time.
All right. So you mentioned that in 2017 Christmas you started the post wrestling, and so I'm going to throw out a few questions about that, and maybe you can answer, as you see fit. So if you could talk about just the planning process around there, if any, what things you threw out, what did you get right, what you didn't get right, what surprised you, all of that leading up to actually launching the site.
Yeah. The name was something that took a while. I think that, we fell into that trap of just becoming so concerned with a name, thinking like all the different places we want to take this thing, what's going to be a name that works. I had batted around the idea of Pollock versus Ting, which wouldn't have been a good idea. It was Way that came up with the name. I think he had just been driving and thought of post wrestling, because it served like a dual function. You have like post shows are something that like we do reviews of, and like that makes sense. It's like the news element of post. And he had the acronym of like Pollock offsets Ting. And at this time, we were at the point where I just wanted a name that I didn't hate upon hearing for the first time. And this one passed that test for me. I was like, let's go with it. So we went with post wrestling. We didn't know if like launching, like the big thing was like Patreon, even in 2017, it's not what it was today, where so many outlets have found Patreon. And more importantly, audiences have found Patreon, and it's a service they feel comfortable signing up on. I mean, there was that concern. Like, really, a friend of ours by the name of Jay Hunter, he runs a site called OSW Review, and I just saw what he was able to do on Patreon. I was like, damn, like, if we can get anywhere close to this, I think we'll be okay. And he was very generous with his time. We leaned on a lot of friends to just get on Skype with us, to give us like advice, like how we do this. Like, we were talking to, we had a lawyer during this whole time, because we're still kind of like negotiating our releases from the Fight Network. It was like a pretty hectic time period as well. But yeah, when it came to Patreon, like we understood, like, we can't screw this up coming out of the gate. Like, I didn't want to launch something and then 6 months later say, we got it all wrong. Let's start again. It's like, I just think that would have really been the wrong tone to set. So we spent a huge amount of time breaking down the tiers, what would be the cost, the price of the different levels that people would be comfortable with, and going in with like no expectation at all. Like I resigned myself to the fact that I'm going to work my ass off till next summer on this project. I can dedicate as much time as I want, and I will just give everything I have for 9 months. And by next summer, if we've got 20 patrons, then the public is telling us something. It's like, we don't have a service that people are willing to pay. And I'm very much about, taking those messages to heart, like if we have a service that is viable or not. But I've got to give it 9 months. We got off to a really strong start, which was, we were very lucky just launching when we did. And I think my concern about we had given away so many shows for all this time, we had never charged people. The inverse effect was, I think we built up a lot of goodwill with people that we did become, a small part of their week. If you're a wrestling fan, listening to us on a Tuesday morning or listening to us after whatever show it is. And people, what I learned, the biggest thing specific to Patreon, was that I think our audience was much less about what I'm paying and going down the list and what I'm getting, what's the value of this and this and this. I think a lot of people signed up just with the notion that I'm helping these guys out and I want this thing to exist. I want this thing to continue. And it was less about what I'm getting versus listeners kind of investing in us. So that was something I didn't necessarily expect, but it was something that was really cool to see. And just kind of the launch, like it is a blur going back to this. It was tough because I was trying my best to keep as much of the law together, like that family together, as possible. But, as people can see, we weren't able to keep everyone together. I'm not going to get into all of that stuff, but, it was, number one, me and Wei had to try and, create jobs for ourselves, essentially. Like, we had just lost our full-time jobs, and, we were just trying to hopefully make something viable out of this, because it's easy to look at now and say, oh, like what a smart idea to launch this. In 2017, this was a crapshoot that had no guarantee of being a success. And even several months in, like, it wasn't a guarantee that this was going to be a long-term thing for us if it was going to work. I definitely wish that when I was younger, I had put more focus into stuff like accounting and a lot of stuff like that, because I'm really out of my element there. Just in terms of like the day-to-day stuff that me and Wei pretty much had to teach ourselves. But it was also a good excuse. Like, it's not something that, if you don't have the incentive to learn something, I don't think it's going to resonate. We kind of had to learn all of this stuff, and it kind of pushes you to get out of your comfort zone. And that's something I still try to do today, is like get away from my comfort zone and do things more out of the ordinary. And on a daily basis, there's just so many things we could go through at the site. And it's sometimes looking at, hey, I've only got so much time and I've got all these ideas of what we can do. And I kind of have to limit myself because I don't have an endless amount of time. When I was younger, I wasn't like the best at doing all of this stuff, but I was able to dedicate all my time, and that wasn't as much a factor. Now it's different for me. I've got to be much more smart with my time and how I use it.
So you touched on with that last bit there about this, going your own way. It's a DIY mentality. You have to do everything yourself. Wei had to learn how to build websites. So I don't think anybody needs to guess that this is far more rewarding for you. But I did want to ask if there's anything from that, your time in the Fight Network, in that big corporate world, that you miss at all.
I would say, like, definitely just the people. I had a lot of friends there, and it was something that I felt like I by the time I left there, that was definitely the thing I missed the most, was just being around a lot of like-minded people. Like, we were all kind of had the same kind of interests and passions. We're working in media in this interesting niche that is combat sports. The people would be number one. I would say, and listen, like, I definitely don't want this to come across as like I had a negative experience at the Fight Network, because overall I did not. One of the best things was the Fight Network left me to my own devices. Like, if I came in, like, if I was working at another major media company and me and Wei had an idea to do a podcast, all the levels I would have to go through to get that done. We just showed up and we did this stuff. We didn't have to ask anyone for permission. We didn't have to run it by anybody. We designed our own graphics. We edited it ourselves, like everything. Wei and I just had a blank canvas. And that's, to me, I work much better that way, where just leave me on my island and I will do the work. I'm not going to be someone that takes advantage of that kind of independence. And the Fight Network is very good about that. If I had an idea, I could push it through a lot. So I did enjoy that aspect. And now, I mean, that's just kind of expanded upon now, where I always knew that if I left the Fight Network, I think I would have had a very difficult transitional period if I had gone somewhere where I was directly reporting to someone and had more of that chain of command ahead of me. So I'm lucky that I'm in an environment now where I do have a lot of freedom, but me and Wei are also very good about, like, neither of us is going to blindside the other. Like, we always are running all these little ideas by one another. Like, we talk every day. We're texting back and forth, like everything, like how this graphic looks, this schedule, when should this show go out? Like, we're in constant contact with one another. So it's never hey, I don't have to keep this person in the loop. That's been I think a very good aspect to our partnership as well. But there's, being at the Fight Network, I'll say this, like, I know for many people, like, the thought is you're on television and then suddenly you're not on television. I can tell you 1000%, like, that's not something I miss in the slightest. I really enjoy doing audio stuff. I really enjoy doing podcasts, but being on television to me was never something, like, it was part of the job. I was asked to do this. It was great that they saw me as being worthy to be one of their people on air. But when that stopped, it was more so just a sign of the Fight Network not doing any original programming that got me, and not so much myself. Like, I would have been just as happy being a producer and working with someone else on air. And there was no part of me that missed being on television.
Now, when you were talking about sort of starting the crowdsourcing thing, you were surprised how, you had this idea that people were just there to support the cause, not so much looking for any specific, return on their dollar. And so that leads to the idea of community. So can you talk about building not just, a series of podcasts, but a community around your shows and around Post Wrestling?
It's probably the best aspect of our site is the community that we've grown, whether it be listeners from the law and beyond to a lot of new people that have found us through this. Like, I think that's super cool. People who just found us in the last year or two. And, whether it be like the people on the forum, what you've been doing, like on the Discord, like, it's just, I really enjoy, like, hearing from a lot of the familiar voices. I love when Brandon from New Jersey calls in every week, and just hearing that laugh as well. And I think you get the sense that
I'm going to have to censor that. He can't get a shout out on this show as well. Okay.
I mean, when is he going to be on the Fishbowl podcast?
Don't even start. Don't start pumping his tires.
But that's really it. Like, I really enjoy whether it's just doing shows with my friends, like these UFC shows that you and I started doing. I mean, we were pretty much doing these once a month when we met up at the Firkin. We were just like, I just one day was like, this is a great podcast. Why don't you just do these with me? And I think it's worked out really well in that sense. So I have never felt like there's been that big of a gap between, us and all of our listeners. Like, I've become friends with like a lot of these people, and that's something I'm extremely proud of, is kind of like the community that we have fostered. I think we have a lot of people, like, you don't get the assholes, and I think that's a huge thing in this day and age online, to have a community that is generally free of, you know, that level of negativity and people that are just trying to stir shit up. You know, just go on the forum. I think like there's a lot of really intelligent conversations that go on, and people that are just cool with one another. And I think we have really lost that when it comes to online discourse, and maybe it was never a thing to begin with. But I'm really happy that we have this community. And I think that, you know, part of that is kind of the tone that gets set on our shows as well.
Continuing on that idea of community, prior to pandemic shutdowns, as part of Post Wrestling, you've had some community events, live events. So can you tell us about those and what that means to your community and to you guys as hosts and people who are running this community?
Yeah, we had never really set out to do any like live shows. And then it just happened in 2014. That year, WrestleMania was going to be in New Orleans. And Wei and I were going to be sent down there to cover the show. This is when we're with the Fight Network. And we just got an email from a guy that was the manager at one of the hotels in town. And he asked us, he was like, would you guys be interested in doing a live podcast at this hotel the day of WrestleMania? And we were like, yeah, sure. So we ended up, you know, it was like 30 people or so that showed up that first year. And we had a great time doing this, like just getting to meet a lot of listeners, and we turned it into a show. And we did that for the ensuing years that we went to WrestleMania, and then we've continued that. Obviously, we haven't done any this year because of the pandemic, but the last one we did would have been last year when SummerSlam was here in Toronto, that we went and did the show over at Second City at the John Candy Box Theater. And we've had like really good turnouts for these shows. It's a chance to meet a lot of listeners. We do like photos with listeners and stuff like that. And it's just fun to do a show in front of people, just like a live Q&A. So it's something I really hope we can do again in the near future, but it may be the distant future at this point. I'm glad that it's not something we relied on in terms of like being live event based, but I hope at some point we can get back to doing them.
Mm-hmm. And now you mentioned something before that answer about sort of just the online space and negativity. And, you know, you always had this idea of being a journalist. And, you know, I look at sports journalism lately, and I find it a bit of like a saving grace. Like, you know, people are talking about a contract. It's very cut and dry. It's mostly fact, little opinion. Whereas the rest of the journalism space, you know, there's a lot of editorialization in the day-to-day coverage. So I don't know if you wanted to touch on that topic at all, your thoughts on, you know, what you've observed in journalism and how you approach the idea of being a journalist and in what's really an entertainment business.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of come at it from the approach that, like, we're in this weird space in specific to pro wrestling, and I'll extend it to MMA as well. I think it's something that, by its very nature, I think people, like the general public, doesn't take seriously. And I always had the thought that, like, if I'm doing this for a living, I am going to take it seriously, because I believe that there's a lot, like if you listen to our shows, if you follow the industry at any length, there's a lot of serious topics that permeate a world that's kind of viewed from the outside as like the circus. And I think that you can apply a very serious while still entertaining way to cover the industry. And that's kind of the balance that I try to strike. Certainly, like when you're listening to our podcasts, you're going to get our opinions. It would be very dry for us to come on and read the results and not offer any opinions. But when it comes to like news gathering and how I'm going to carry myself out, like I always feel that reporters have to have like a professionalism about them. Like I don't want to be that person that is just going to go on Twitter and ever make one of our listeners that maybe looks at me for whatever reason as kind of a, as any kind of, information source, and be embarrassing to that person by coming out and, just doing anything that I think there's already enough of a stigma to me against pro wrestling. I'm not going to contribute to it by being further embarrassing or anything like that. I just think like there's a way that you can be entertaining, but also have professionalism about you. And that's just how I've always approached anything that I've reported on, is doing it in a serious manner. But you can also, like, there's going to be lighthearted stuff that comes with the day-to-day news cycle of in MMA and pro wrestling.
Just to add my 2 cents on that, on your level of professionalism. So, we're friends, and you mentioned, we'll have a drink from time to time, and I can definitely mention several times where I will just, say something I wouldn't say on the air about, some fighter, who doesn't pass the sniff test, about them being a juice head. And, even privately, John, you don't take the bait. You will not say anything without the, a great deal of care, because, you never stop being a journalist, is, I guess, how I observe you. So anyway, I think the fans really respect that about you. And
I hope you don't look at me as a dull friend, but it is how I am wired. So, I mean, that's just, and this is like I have a weird job in the sense that it's not like I shut things off at 5:00 and then it stops. It's a 24/7 thing. And I guess a lot of these things it's how I approach all of it. And I think it's also interesting for me when I am observing reporters, journalists in other fields, and kind of contrasting, because I find that to be something that I draw from a lot, is learning about other industries, and then how does this apply to my own as well. And it's kind of interesting when you contrast that as well.
Okay, so you actually already mentioned, that the MMA, but even more specifically, pro wrestling has, a history of very serious topics that you've had to cover. And so I'm gonna touch on some of these that I can recall, and maybe you want to speak on
Sure.
any or a few of them. So there was the death of Owen Hart, the death of Chris Benoit, and that murder-suicide. Many drug and tragic wrestling work-related deaths. Donald Trump ran for president. He is a WWE Hall of Famer. You were also in New York City during the election. The last couple years, the WWE had a controversial deal with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The pandemic had a dramatic effect. The Black Lives Matter movement you've covered. The pro wrestling industry has its own Me Too movement, the Speaking Out movement. So, these are all very, very serious topics. And so, if you want to just talk about broadly how you approach these things, and with any specific anecdotes or anything about any of these, or any ones that I didn't mention.
I think with a lot of those topics, like when I think like it wasn't by design, but I do feel that when people do think of post wrestling, I think they are going to think of how we've handled a lot of those stories. And I think that really what kind of set that in motion was how we were going to approach the WWE's relationship in Saudi Arabia. And so they announced this deal. It was a 10-year deal with the General Sports Authority in Saudi Arabia to do shows every year beginning in 2018. And in the lead up to it, it was like, I was definitely very conflicted, because there's a lot of terrible things that are going on in Saudi Arabia. And my initial thought was, okay, does that disqualify citizens of Saudi Arabia from getting a live entertainment vehicle in WWE coming to those shows? And watching that first show they did, which became a commercial for the country, that's when I realized we cannot review this as strictly a wrestling show. To eliminate the obvious politics that are being injected into this show. This was not a case of just we're presenting a show and there's nothing like that. Was like, you could understand what this deal was. Why is the government spending so much money for the WWE to come here? It is with, the announcers explaining things in a very specific way, the infomercials that aired during the show as well. Like, this was done to really sell you on like Mohammed bin Salman and the government in Saudi Arabia. And that was definitely I think, turning point for me and Way's coverage. And by the time they did their second show, that was where we wanted to go all in terms of covering the show unlike any other wrestling shows. And this coincided. The WWE ran their second show of this deal. It was November 2nd of 2018. It was exactly 1 month after the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And there was a ton of negative publicity for WWE to go through with this show. It was not a show that I was looking forward to watching and sitting through, but I knew it was a very important show that we had to cover. And I would not have felt responsible in kind of ignoring it either. I think this is something that we make the decision very clearly. Are we going to be a site that covers this or runs away from it? And I very much, and Way was too, on the side of we have to cover this. And we ended up doing a show where we agreed that for every minute that we broadcast, we were going to make a donation to the Committee to Protect Journalists. And we ended up doing a 4-hour show, and we had guests that ran the gamut of outside journalists, from advocacy groups, from pro wrestling journalists, to talk about a lot of the actual issues involved in the politics of this whole deal beyond just the wrestling show, which was so secondary. So I think that really established kind of our mindset towards handling other very delicate issues beyond Saudi Arabia, the speaking out movement, as you mentioned, with Black Lives Matter. I mean, these are all...
Sorry, can you just actually maybe talk about the speaking out movement? Because I think that's actually something that people outside of the wrestling industry would not know about.
So this was really pro wrestling's Me Too movement that occurred earlier this year, where it began with a lot of women coming forward, and some men as well, about abuses that they had suffered. And it just became one after the other. And it was to me, it was a gigantic, eye-opening moment of a lot of the failings of the professional wrestling industry. And I think this is very widespread, but seeing in harrowing detail what a lot of these people had gone through, the setup that a lot of these companies have, where it's a training school that supplies talent to its adjacent wrestling organization that places, let's be honest, a lot of people with powerful positions that abuse that power by being in these positions to dictate people's careers. You're talking about an industry that is not regulated, that kind of runs on its own. And this was a giant spotlight on the failings of the setup of that industry. Now we are several months removed, and I think it leaves people with a lot of conflict on how it goes on, where there are performers that have returned to television or that have resumed their careers while these allegations are out there, and the audience is kind of left to make their own conclusions. Like, there are those that have denied those allegations and it's just a dispute that is left with the audience to kind of feel conflicted about certain performers. But to me, this was like the pandemic overall. It's affected the entire world, and certainly pro wrestling has not been spared. That is, to me, that and the speaking out movement have been like the only stories you can look at this year in terms of like how monumental they have been within the world of professional wrestling.
Okay. So you established the site at the end of 2017. You've established a community around that. So what are some of your plans for the future, or what are maybe some of your longer term goals? Maybe not even related to post wrestling specifically.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything is connected to post wrestling for the near and long term future. Way and I actually have contracts with Post Wrestling Incorporated, so we literally can't go anywhere. I mean, it's something that I don't know what this site will look like a year from now, much less 2 years from now. I think that me and Wei are constantly coming up with different ideas. It's just how do we develop them and commit to something, and knowing that our plates are so full as it is. I would love a scenario where we are able to hire more people, and we're slowly being able to integrate more people into our site. We have a reporter named Andrew Thompson who has been just phenomenal. He started with us a year ago, and he's just done a fantastic job and is doing more and more work for us as well. We've also seen like Braden Harrington and Davey Portman. They started doing their show through our network. They've branched off to launch their own Patreon, and I'd love to see them just continue to grow that. When it comes to just, I'm always looking for like, what are newer ideas that we can come up with that, we've done things a certain way for so long. I never want to get into that trap that we do this because we've always done it this way. I've never been a fan of that kind of thinking, because I think you get very stagnant that way if you just get into the routine of doing something. And I'm very mindful as well about what I dedicate my time to. That, I used to have the mindset that I have to watch everything, I have to cover everything. That's impossible now. There's no way I can do that. I've gotten much better with delegating things. And also, I just weigh things. Like, if I'm going to spend 2 hours watching this show and it's going to amount to chatting about it on a podcast for 5 minutes, it's not worth the 2 hours that I'm going to put into this. And I've come to the realization I can't cover everything. Like, that's impossible. So I want to expand more when it comes to people working on the site. I want to be able to come up with fresh ideas. I think in the podcast world, there's several ideas like I've batted around, but it's always moving forward. I balance kind of our MMA coverage as well, like how much I put into that. I mean, Eric Marcotte, another part of our community. I mean, that guy is just phenomenal. He does reports every single weekend. They're like, this guy will send in like the most detailed report, and I have no criticism. I have no notes to send him back. I'm like, this is amazing. He does a fantastic job. And I would say without him, I think our MMA coverage would be much smaller and limited, because I'm not at a point in my life now where I can give up every Saturday night for a UFC show like I could before. And I also, that's me having to, I'll say this is a big difference, because at the Fight Network and the Law, I would cover whatever I wanted to cover, and I could be selfish in that sense. If I want to spend my night watching a Bellator, boom, write a report, do a show on it, I could do that. Now I know I've got this limited amount of time, and just because I have an interest level in something doesn't mean our audience in a great number has that same interest. So I have to weigh that. It's not covering what I want, it's covering what the most amount of people are going to want as well. So that's something I work on as well.
Well, knowing that you're mindful of your time, I'm very thankful that you spent the last couple hours with me and not watching some wrestling.
Is this it? Are you giving me the rap here? Phil, I cleared out my day for you.
You cleared. Well, I mean, you are just so brilliant and eloquent and concise with your responses that
I don't know if I'm concise. I ramble. I fully admit
nothing.
That.
There was. I can't think of anything that was unnecessary. So it was a good amount of information, and you ran the gamut of my questions. Really. I mean, I do have this one, and I've asked you this privately. It's just sort of this idea. I mean, I asked you what your first wrestling memory was, and you talk about being a fan, a 7-year-old kid, just being in love with it, and it's been your career now for, I mean, almost 20 years, if not, I mean, 20 years you've been working in this business. So you still find it fun? I mean, if so, where do you find the fun?
I still enjoy doing what I do. I mean, we've all had those points in our life where we have jobs that you wake up and it's, oh God, I have to go to work. I've been extremely lucky for a lot of my career that I haven't had that. Although it's a feeling that I have had in my life that I've always tried to avoid. I still enjoy covering things when things are great. I enjoy them as much as anyone. I'm really excited to watch this UFC card on Saturday night. It's a small ESPN Plus card. It's not a small ESPN Plus card. It's like a really stacked card. I can still look forward to watching things. And Saturday as well, it's like I also don't really need to cover it either. That's Eric's job. So I can just watch this card on Saturday night. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm excited to watch the G1 coming up as well. So I can still really enjoy what I cover. But at the same time, like there are times and there's stories and there's events where it does feel like work because it's you compound it on top of each other. When there's those weekends, like coming up next weekend, Phil and I are going to do a UFC post show. That's on a day or a weekend where the very next morning there's a G1 show. Then there's a WWE pay-per-view on the Sunday night. It's like none of those events am I specifically dreading, but it's those weekends where they just pile up on each other that can be pretty tiring at times to just, how am I going to carve out all of this time while also still being mindful of having time to myself as well and my family, which I'm trying to do better in terms of just balancing.
So I already thanked you for your time.
You can thank me multiple times. How was this interview? Like, give me a grade. Like, where does this fall for you?
Well, I mean, there's always room for improvement. I certainly feel in my chair there's a lot of room for improvement, and I'm far more critical of my performance than I am of yours. But no, I enjoyed it, John. I mean, reality is when I conceived of this show, you were on that short list of people that I had to have in that first group. And I was trying to actually avoid booking you early on because I knew you'd say yes. It was almost too easy to get you on. But I'm very thankful that I finally had you on, and it was a great chat. And I learned a lot too. There was a lot of things that I didn't know about your time at the Law and the Fight Network there that was really interesting and insightful, and I'm sure that the fans enjoyed listening to it. Is there anything that you want to say to the fans? Maybe you can let them know where they can find you if they want to check out more of your work.
I'll get to all that, but I want to chat about Phil for a few minutes here.
Oh, no.
Because I was thinking about this ahead of time, because I thought maybe it would come up.
Gosh, I can't.
Am
I allowed to edit this out?
No, this better stay in there.
Okay.
My first memory of Phil Chair Talk was working at the Empress Walk movie theater. And I do recall, I don't know if you remember this, but I just met like all these new people. It was like a big addition of friends all at once, all I thought fairly like-minded people. And I remember accidentally calling you Paul, because you were a 4-letter word that started with P, and I confused you with another friend of ours named Paul.
I think there was a few Pauls there too.
There were a few. Like, it was like this group, by the way, like when we were like hanging out, there would be times it'd be like 16 deep. Like it was a crew. Yeah. Before the word crew just got thrown out.
The bubble tea place would clear out.
They would just leave. They're like, the crew is here. I also recall you finding out that I got the Observer and asking me to borrow an Observer because you were really fascinated with the star ratings. And I remember going, when you had asked, do you remember this at all? I've got a very good memory.
I don't remember that at all. I mean, it doesn't sound unrealistic because my relationship with professional wrestling was, I was a kid. I liked it. Like I mentioned, I watched, the Shawn Michaels throw Marty Jannetty through the barbershop window. But I fell out of whatever. I just lost interest. And then I got a job as a teenager, and my boss was really into the dirt sheets. And so he told me about the Observer. And that got me interested because I was kind of into the business, like the businessy side was intriguing, all this backstage stuff. I didn't know. I just saw what they put on TV. And that also coincided with the rise of the Attitude Era. So it was very popular at the time. So so even though I don't remember the specific story, it sounds plausible because I was into the idea of the Observer. I don't remember ever having a copy though.
Well, I do remember lending you an Observer. As I recall, I believe I lent it to you. I might have lent you some tapes as well. I can't recall exactly, but
that sounds familiar. That sounds familiar.
Maybe it was it was some comp tape I might have lent you, as I recall.
Yes, that is.
But at this point, like, you're what, 2 years older than me? I think
that's right. 1982.
So this time in high school, like, you're in the program that I had this, like, by grade 11, I really, like, the only place I wanted to go for university was Ryerson in the radio and television arts program. But the big hurdle was so many people apply for this and such a small number get into it. And when I met you and you were in this elusive program, I was like, this is where I want to be in 2 years. And there was a time that we were out and talking about this Kurt Cobain documentary. And I guess I was just talking about what my thoughts were on it. And you emailed me later. This might have been where you were asking about borrowing some wrestling stuff, but you told me, I really enjoyed your thoughts. You clearly understand, like, documentary filmmaking. And I was like, shit, this guy, like, you might not realize this. You had a reputation among our friends as being super intelligent, to the point that you were, like, intimidating to some people. This was told to me, dude. This was told to me by a mutual friend. I never want to get into an argument with Phil because that would be daunting.
Well, it was all an illusion. I mean, that's for sure. I don't know. I mean, I like to argue in an obnoxious way. I think that was why probably people were intimidated by it. I don't think it had any intelligence. And me just understanding documentary filmmaking was just more me having 2 years of experience in that space. But it's great to hear that.
I always enjoyed, like, chatting with you about anything. It was one of the reasons I always loved, like, even as we kind of drifted apart, I'd usually hear from you, like, once a year after WrestleMania with your thoughts. Like, that would be like the one show, because I always, like, really valued, like, your thoughts and opinions, because you would bring up stuff that I'm too far in the bubble sometimes to see from the outside perspective.
Yeah, well, the impetus for that was really just I think I hadn't watched any wrestling in over a decade, and I was somewhere and there was with some friends and they were watching WrestleMania, and it was a lot of fun. I was just sort of surprised at how much fun I was having, and a large part of that was just the company. And then, but I really enjoyed it. I even enjoyed what I was watching. And then I went online and I realized that the commentators, or the fans, were trashing a lot of what I liked. And so I thought, oh, well, that's curious. And so that's when I shared, my insights with you, that because sometimes you could see that what is appealing to the average viewer may not be appealing to the most ardent fan.
My last question, as I turn the tables here. Yeah. Among our circle of friends, and Ziggy is disqualified, who would be the person you would want to interview the most on this show? Who would be the most interesting person in that circle for you to speak with?
The most interesting person in our
and you've interviewed me, so I'm off the list, of course.
And I've interviewed another one of our friends as well.
That's true, you have. Yes.
I mean, well, if I had to, I guess just from a interest standpoint, it would be our old friend Neil DaCosta. Who
I thought you would go with him. I feel I think the microphone comes on, I think he'd be much more reserved. But if you got unfiltered Neil DaCosta, yes, that would probably be fantastic.
Yeah, so Neil, to fill in some of the audience, Neil was another person who worked at the movie theater with us, and he was just a big, bombastic personality. that over time could, he had a way of rubbing people the wrong way. And he also
I think everyone had their battles with him. Like a very, a guy that I'm very, very good friends with. But yeah, definitely had. I think everyone had their times with one Neil DaCosta.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, in terms of interviewing him, I'd be more interested to just reflect on that, because I feel like from what you've told me, I haven't spoken to him in, I guess, 20 years or so. But what you've told me and our other friends have said is he's kind of mellowed out. He's gotten married. He has at least one kid or two. So it's always interesting to, reminisce on that and see if people can sort of, gain any reflection. We mentioned our friend Ziggy, who used to do our MMA podcast with us early on. He's a very different person than the person that we know now. And he's almost unrecognizable from the person I knew as a small, we were kids together. So those stories are always interesting. So for that reason, I'd be intrigued with DaCosta. But I'm sure there's a lot of people I'd love to interview from that period, because there was a lot of cool people who worked at that place. It was pretty interesting. Fun time.
Very fun, Phil, as was this interview.
All right. Thank you very much, John. So where can people check you out?
Well, if you have listened to this and you want to hear more, you want to read more, postwrestling.com is where you can go. The Patreon that myself and Wei run, you can find it at postwrestlingcafe.com. We're doing our big event of the year, which is the G1 Climax that New Japan puts on. We do a review after every single one of the 19 events. If you join the Post Wrestling Cafe, it's $6 a month. That gives you all the extra shows that we put out every month, plus access to our archive. And do check out myself and Phil. We're going to be doing our UFC 253 post show next Saturday night, right after Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa.
Always a pro, John. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Can't wait till next Saturday. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Goodbye.
I want to thank John for joining me today and talking about his career in broadcasting, and I want to thank everybody for listening at home. We will be back soon with another episode.